over the market. This applies to U.S. history. When you look at exporting, what really kick-started America into a world power was exporting its trade and exporting things out of the country. This is what Mexico hopes to achieve by building pipelines and opening the drill sites. They will gain political power and strengthen their economy.
By building drill sites, are those on offshore, or are they?
The drill sites are offshore, yes.
Where offshore?
They actually have a map in the article. It's in the Gulf of Mexico. Mostly near the southern portion of Mexico. So, right there.
So close to. Close to Central America.
Mm-hmm.
The Yucatan. And so they're doing this to industrialize. Is that correct? Did I catch that?
Yes.
And why do they want to industrialize?
To start exporting and strengthen their economy, more or less.
Wow. And when is this going through?
They already have some of the pipelines built, and I forget when they had the prediction date. But it's like already behind schedule, kind of, than the government hoped.
So it's the gas that they're exporting?
Yeah, natural gas.
How will that affect U.S. exports?
It'll be interesting. Because I think, from what it sounds like, some of the pipelines are actually going into the U.S. And so, it'd be going both ways.
Is that through NAFTA that they're coming into the U.S.? Or did it mention?
It didn't mention.
Wow.
Can I say something?
Certainly.
Actually, they do have pipelines already. They're in the Nuevo Leon area, and up near Juarez, and then also Monterey, going right out of Monterey, which is also part of Nuevo Leon, but that's all right south of Texas, because Juarez is right on the border of El Paso, and they do have pipelines already, but the ones that they have already are controlled by the Zetas. So there's a little bit of a war because the different cartels are trying to overrun it from the government. So that's what they're going to be drilling these new ones, and they're going to be out like near Cancun, kind of. That's like as much as I know about it.
That's quite a bit. Thank you, Robin. Any other questions or comments? All right.
So this, like, you're just tying it into, they're trying to do what we've done before.
Yeah,
It.
like during our Industrial Revolution. Exporting goods and...
Are they trying?
Are they what?
Are they trying to get bigger by any chance? Like, oh, let's become more of a world power and maybe expand. Do you think that might be one of the future goals? Maybe expand into Central America?
Probably.
That's always a question, isn't it? Expansion, and because from the beginning of nations, they've continually traded borders, traded properties.
Like, now it's like I'm sure there are like territories and stuff that change ownership, but like in general, every nation kind of has its set borders, and that's kind of what it's been for a little while now. Is like there
Except for the Ukraine.
There hasn't been any big expansions. Like U.S. hasn't invaded Japan and taken over those islands for more U.S. territory.
Yeah, Russia's been the last one who's.
I think the biggest problem they're going to have in Mexico, which this is the biggest problem they have, and the government's so corrupt, and then the cartels, because these cartels are, I mean, in wars every day there's at least 10 people killed. So, you know, and then you start having oil. I think that's going to be their biggest problem, is trying to deal with these cartels, which they have, you know, no control over.
All right. Great current event, Brian. Next one.
This is my legislative current event. Education is always a very controversial topic, even more so when the legislature is involved. The kind of education and the funding for the education are both very important. Funding is very important on all levels of education. As of this week, our state government has been revising and reconsidering the funding for education in Alaska. This year, the University of Alaska received $335 million, but for the next year they are proposing cuts over 17%. This would be a dramatic change for the university. This reduced amount of money would have restrictions on it also. The restrictions would reserve the money strictly for student education. This would not be good for research and public service projects that the University of Alaska does. The cut would result in 500 to 900 job losses throughout the entire university system. But regardless, the UA has to pay for these new costs by reducing spending and elsewhere and increasing revenue. This very much applies to history. Education has always been a very controversial topic. Who organizes schools and who tells them what to teach? Who gives them the funding and who gets the money? Are they all separate but equal, or one school funded better than the others? Education is so important because it is teaching the future. The generations coming up in the school are the future. So everyone wants to promote that, but like Alaska's situation, cuts have to be made. So where do you make those cuts?
Exactly. Okay. Questions, comments for Brian?
How many people are supposed to get cut? 509?
500 to 900. They were.
A big margin. Like, okay, you could lose this many or double that number.
There are quite a few employees from the University of Alaska. And actually, 335 is the governor's proposed budget for this coming fiscal year. This fiscal year 16, we received $351 million. The Senate Sub-Finance Committee came out at $300 million. So it's a cut of 51 million if that survives. The governor proposed the 335. So the difference between the 300 and the 351 is your 17%, but it's actually 18%. It's 17.9.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
It is, and if you look at the state budget, education is top. Okay, we have expensive schools. University money isn't top. K-12 is education. But if you talk, when you look at the budget and you look at budget cuts for the state, and you look at budget cuts to the K-12 and to the university combined, I don't even know what the proposal is. The governor proposed for K-12 still to keep the $50 increase that they had put into law 3 years ago. But we'll see. So, if you were looking here in Glen Ellen, the cuts for the school district, K-12, are anywhere up to 900,000 right now, estimates. And cuts to this site for the university, it's potentially closing. So that's those are worst case scenarios. $1 million for K-12 and closing the college at this site. But they've thrown education proposals out to close every university system campus except for Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau. That was last year.
So like shop grants, like we just got to do $30,000 router.
Not a grant.
That wasn't a grant.
Not a grant. Came from the budget. Yes. You're welcome.
And like, so
They do that box.
$19,000, I think, is what we got from Carl Perkins' vocational grant this year. And I could be wrong. It was 9 or 19.
that's all from the K-12 school.
That's from K-12.
Plus all the other stuff that's done this year.
Yes.
But hey, shops really cool now.
Well, hey.
And it's working.
Well, hey.
Yeah, it's not so cluttered and broken down.
So some of you are graduating. Some of you will be using the university system. Robin, who does all her classes online, will be able to continue to do classes online because she can access any of the university system. What they're trying to do is they're trying to consolidate and move online classes perhaps to one campus. They're throwing out all kinds of ideas, okay? Because they realize how important it is, one, to keep high school students like yourselves enrolled, right? And two, keep current college students like Robin enrolled to finish degrees, right? I mean, it's all about, in my mind, not everybody's mind, but in my mind, it's all about you. It's all about the students, right? But university also has to run like a business.
They make money.
And, well, they never make money. I mean, they spend more than they make. That's the problem. So what kind of revenue sources did they talk about? Potential revenue sources.
Oh, my computer just died.
Okay.
But, I mean, I would expect tuition and...
Tuition and fees are increasing again next year.
By how much?
I don't know.
A lot, a little?
Generally, well, they're arguing over it right now. It'll be less than 5%. Generally. Right now, it's $160 a credit. It is likely to go up to $165, perhaps, a credit. Fees are what get you. They increased facilities fees $2 this semester. They increased,
$2?
yeah, $2 a credit. You added up for all the people who are in the university system, and it was millions.
It adds up, and then
Yeah.
you're doing that for your degree.
Go ahead.
I have the list of like what they said is gonna like they'll be closing. You'll get no academic advisors. There's no processing and test administration. Longer wait times. Fewer student jobs across campus. Outsourcing and privatization of university services. Reduction or elimination of many academic programs. Closures of and loss of access to buildings. That's what they're proposing to do.
Where did you find that one, Robin?
It's in my email that I just got from the Union of Students.
Oh, would you mind forwarding that to me? Because I don't have that one yet.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you. Yeah, so, the state is bleeding, And
Green.
it is,
Basically, it's on its knees
it
right
will
now.
change how you are able to access education in the state. It truly will. Between K-12 and college, it will change again. And it could be very dramatic for all of you here in this room and on Cyberland, in Cyberland.
Yeah, it says a loss of 600 to 1,000 faculty and staff positions and countless programs that benefit students. That's a lot. Wow.
Yes. And
What's the reasoning behind all these cuts?
we're not
The
getting money from the
state
state of
doesn't-
Alaska.
No, I mean, like why aren't we? Why is the state of Alaska cutting back?
It's $3.6 billion in the hole. They budgeted for $65 a barrel, and it's currently at $28.
I thought they budgeted, it was the year before they budgeted at $100 a barrel.
Yeah.
And then it dropped to like $30 a barrel.
On the chart that you should all talk to Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson Robin is the school superintendent. He has, or go to the ASB meetings. He has a slide that shows when they were predicting where the pie was and how much had to come out of the state budget, out of the state savings account. They didn't even go below $30 a barrel, but it's now below $30 a barrel. So
Is that just 'cause there's so much of it?
it tanked. Well, there are a lot of different reasons, but yes, that's one of them. Is that there's more in the marketplace than before.
Well,
China and
why would
India,
that make it less? Why not charge the same amount and you just got more stuff?
because
Well,
of
that's what
supply and
OPEC has
demand.
done in the past. Go ahead, Garrett.
Supply and demand. I mean,
Ah.
there's such a huge glut of it because China and India has stopped developing at such a rapid rate. I mean, when they first started developing, it went from $20 a barrel to $100 a barrel. Now it's doing the same thing, but they just stopped. Just going back.
Right. China's growth at this time has gone from double digits to single digits in their economy. Okay? But it's still a lot higher than ours in the growth. So, getting back to this current event, educating the future, and what do you do? And it's a question that every person in the state has to answer. But every person in Arizona had to answer it in the last 10 years. Every person in these other states and nations have had to answer it.
And eventually it'll go back up, right? 'Cause
Eventually it should go back
it'll
up.
go back up, yeah.
That's
Question is,
that's
how
our
long is
that's
that
our
gonna
theory.
take?
I
Yes.
don't want oil prices to go back up. I like cheap gas.
I do, 'cause that's where I was planning on getting a job. Now it's
Would you
like,
rather
well,
cheap
I
college
might
or
have to
cheap
rethink my
Cheap
choice.
college or cheap gas.
Man,
Ah.
look at it this way. What's going to cost you more in the long run? 4 years of college or a lifetime of $4.50 a gallon gas
Okay.
versus
Well,
$2?
we're not going to get into that discussion right now, but I do. Does anybody else have a comment about the cuts in education?
Besides, it makes us diversify our
Okay, he just couldn't help himself.
No.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Great current event. All right. Who wants to read this quote?
America's present need is not heroics, but healing. Not nostrums, but normalcy. Not revolution, but restoration. Warren G. Harding.
Okay. Warren G. Harding? Who is Harding? Somebody get it right. President of the United States. Thank you very much.
I don't remember that name.
Oh, well, sir, you're going to have to remember that name. Yes, you will have to remember that name. Well, it would help, I think, perhaps. Wouldn't it? All right. there? No?
Oh, is this chapter 22? Chapter 21.
It's chapter 22. And we stopped, we went through this map. Boom times in industry and agriculture. Right? All right, so is this pretty common to have booms during a war?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. And so you have this development in industry and agriculture. Why was agriculture up during this time?
Well, they gotta feed food, and if they're giving support to other countries, they're shipping out a lot of it. So
Exactly.
not only are we consuming a lot, we're shipping out a lot.
Yes, we are shipping out a lot. And you had a government organization that took care of that. That made sure that the food was distributed in an efficient manner. Okay, that was the whole goal of the organization. So, war benefited the U.S. economy between 14 and 18. Okay, the factory output grew over a third. All right, wages increased 20%. Auto production went to 1.8 million in 1917 from 460,000 in 1914. So people are actually buying things during the war. But we weren't always at war, were we? No. Okay, so blacks migrate northward. Why? Industry and work. Yes. Cities. Yes. So, three things that would happen in the north with blacks in the cities. Brianna, give me one. Name three things that would happen when blacks migrated north and worked in the cities. And just name me one. Okay. It's pretty similar to what's happened before. So, anybody have a guess? Hazard a guess? What's that? Yes, a larger workforce, but specifically for blacks. What was going on? Was it as oppressive in the north as it was in the south? Was there racial discrimination? Was it as bad as in the south? No. Okay. Was there more opportunity in the north? Yes. Okay. Did it change the social structure of cities? Did it change the social structure of the blacks? Yes. Not as many yeses, but yes. Yes, it did. It changed the social structure. You have new organizations. You have NCAA member numbers increased. Churches, black churches. Okay, remember, black churches have been gaining ground, and they continue to gain ground. All right. Population movements really heightened race consciousness. Okay. It laid the groundwork for civil rights movements. All right, that's important to remember. So there were a lot of different challenges. Were there mobs and killings? Yes, on both sides. Yes, there were, social problems. Social problems. Okay, women in wartime. Did women benefit from the war? They got jobs. Did they already have jobs? Yeah, there wasn't a significant increase I mean, there was an increase, but it wasn't a significant increase of women in the workforce. What happened when the men came home?
Well, they were like,
They didn't have jobs. The jobs went back to the vets. Same thing happened in World War II. Okay? They had worked on women's suffrage, right? 1917, 1919. What is the amendment that gave women suffrage? The right to vote. Which amendment is that? Yes. The 19th. When was it ratified? 1919. It was ratified soon after, yes. Okay. It was actually 1920.
my hopes up.
Close. It's close. Okay. So, the war did little to change women's lives or status permanently. All right? Women had, they wanted equality. Did women get equality?
They got more
A little
rights,
bit. They didn't, not equality.
but they got more.
If Savannah works the same job as Garrick, does she get paid the same?
No.
Today, if Savannah works the same job as Garrick, does she get paid the same?
I could either work really hard or work really sloppy.
What do you think?
I'm gonna work really hard.
It's a yes or no. Does Savannah get the same pay?
No.
Aiden has it. It's no. The last job I worked in Anchorage, I was at the top of the pay scale, is what they told me, until my friend started, and he said, you got a raise because I told him I wasn't starting at a higher rate than you, because you've already been here for 2 years. My friend Jeff. So, no, women don't always get the same pay. All right? Sometimes. And it can very well depend on the job and negotiation. A lot of things play into it. At this time, it was dramatic, the difference.
And your experience.
Go ahead, Robin.
I was just saying, it depends on, both of your experience, but that's not necessarily true because like, my mom worked for Alyeska, and she was in the human resources, and there was a guy that had less experience than her, making almost twice as much as her at the same job. There's definitely not an equality.
Yes. Yes. There is. It happens. It happens. So, the flu in 1918, they found and recently, in the last, 10 years, recreated the flu virus from actually somebody they dug up here in Alaska. The flu hit and killed an estimated 50 to 100 million people. All right, 1918. Yes, actually 2 or 3 bodies. Because they wanted to research the flu, the 1918 flu.
How do you
How do you do that?
No. See, the flu changes. It changes every year. That's why they come up with a new flu shot. But the new flu shot doesn't always match what the flu is doing because they're germs. They constantly mutate and change, right?
How are they
It's because the flu is a virus.
Mm-hmm.
The virus is like with bacteria. Bacteria doesn't do that. Bacteria stage itself.
Yes.
I'm guessing this is when they developed hazmat suits.
No, they developed hazmat suits a while ago, Savannah.
No, but how do you get permission to do that? Like, hey, we're from a
Research.
special agency. Can we dig up your
Scientific
long lost
research.
brother to research his body? It's like
Research. Yeah, research. So, it came in And it originated where? Yeah. Nope. Very far away from Alaska. It originated in Africa. Okay?
Oh.
And if you think about it, think of all the things that have originated in Africa. Of the major pandemics and epidemics. Ebola, right? The Zika. The 1918 flu. Okay? They've traced them to Africa.
Well, that's where the beginning of mankind is, so it kind of makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, and yeah, it would be a fascinating research project for an or what are the people who work on the vaccines? A vaccine person.
Epidemiologist.
It was.
Isn't that what it's called?
That's what I thought it was. And okay. All right, so it came in through Fort Riley. Fort Riley, they were doing training, right? Recruits. So it spread like wildfire everywhere. Okay, Alaska. It hit Alaska in the 1900s, right? Pretty far away. It's not in Kansas anymore. So the government was forbidding public gatherings. About 195,000 Americans died in October alone. All right, significant. It was significant. So, the death toll of 550,000, it was over 6 times the number of battle deaths in France. Okay. So, the 19th Amendment. Here you go.
That's short.
It is short and sweet. Oh, not all government things are like that. The war on progressivism. The war had mixed effects on progressivism. Did it strengthen some? Yes, it strengthened prohibition. It strengthened moral control. Pabst and Schlitz and things with German origins were targeted as not being patriotic, or that they would undermine America and American fitness. Okay, this is one thing that they used for temperance. The 18th Amendment was what?
Prohibition.
Yes. Wow, I'm impressed.
When did that?
It passed in 1917.
Well, obviously it's not in effect
Huh.
now.
They passed
How
it
did they,
right as everybody else went off to war. Gee, what a surprise.
So, did they amend that amendment, or did they just vote to remove that?
They voted to remove it. To rescind it.
We got all the front congressmen.
So it was ratified. It went into effect in 1920, January 1, 1920. Okay, it was widely seen as a war measure. It went together. They went together. Okay, women's right to vote. Did it go together with the war?
Yeah.
Yes, it did. Yes, when the men were gone. Well, yeah, some, yes. Yeah. Okay, so they were also targeting prostitution, anti-prostitution campaigns, vigilance campaigns, morals, morality. You had labor reform with the War Labor Board, the Bureau of War Risk Insurance to aid soldiers' families. In the short run, it weakened the progressive movement as a powerful social justice impulse. All right? That was short term. Long term, there were effects that would last, and you can see them. You will see them again, like in the New Deal. Right? Those are some progressive things. Let's see. So, okay, I think we'll move on. Wilson's 14 points and the armistice. we come to the war. Wilson went to war. Why? What was it? He wanted peace, and he wanted peace in a certain way, right? That incorporated democracy. All right. So he came up with 14 points to transform a world order, right? To create this transformed world order. This is really important. And so he went to Congress in January of 1918. 8 promised Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman subject peoples' right to self-determination. The 9th was about imperial disputes. Consider the interests of the colonized people. And 5 points were free navigation, free trade, reduced armaments, openly negotiated treaties, and general association of nations to resolve conflicts peacefully. All right. Do we have any organizations today that you can see similarities to the 14 points? The UN, yes. What else? Not in this nation. We're not a part of it. Yes. Well, it's not the Eastern European, but it is the European Union, yes. Very good. Very good. So, it actually helped solidify America's support for the war. Going from neutrality to a goal of peace in a certain way. All right? Did the Wilson's 14 points survive? No. Okay. Did they survive elsewhere?
Yes.
They did. We just didn't sign it. The United States didn't sign it. Because Wilson, diplomatically, didn't include enough Republican people to convince Congress to ratify it. Right? He took one Republican with him to the peace conference. And the Republican really didn't have a lot of power. And so he didn't choose the wisest person to help him promote it. Okay? So, in October of 1918, Germany proposed the armistice on the points. The British and the French hesitated. Wilson said, I'm going to sign a peace whether you are going to do it or not. And so they finally agreed. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated and the German Republic was proclaimed. Okay? When was it signed?
11/11/18.
Yes. 11/11/18. At 11 o'clock in the morning. 11/11/11. Okay? So the Versailles Peace Conference is where Wilson led the U.S. delegation. Okay? You had Italy present, you had France present, you had England present, and you had Japan present. Who wanted reparations from Germany?
France, England,
Everyone. But who was focused on that? Who was focusing on making Germany pay? France and England. Exactly. Okay. So, they really, according to your book, wanted to punish them for their wartime losses. And they were extreme. Germany had extreme wartime losses. So Germany signed it, and it was harshly punitive. Okay? They were disarmed. It was stripped of its colonies. They had to admit sole blame for the war. And there were staggering reparation payments. So they had to pay the other nations for the war. Right? So what does that lead to? World War II. Exactly. So Wilson, when Germany gave up or was stripped of its colonies. A lot of those colonies went to the Allies. What's that? Okay. All right. So, yes.
What else was it stripped of? I know it couldn't have an army or navy.
Let me repeat myself, because I just said that. So, stripped of its colonies, admitting sole blame for the war, and staggering reparation payments, plus being disarmed. Okay? They lost a tenth of their population and an eighth of their territory. Now, if you look at Germany and its borders, those borders move. All right? They didn't only move during World War I. So when it says that it lost an eighth of its territory, it lost an eighth of its territory that it started in World War I, but that doesn't mean that it hadn't already expanded, right? So, and you see this dramatically with Poland, when you see where the lines are divided before and after World War II, okay? Because Poland is really the go-through nation, okay? Poor Poland. But Poland was independent, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Now these countries have been established, and I would have to go back, but I know that the Latvian and Lithuanian history, they were independent nations long before this. Okay? But that territory goes back and forth. This is what I'm saying. Those borders continually change. Okay? And when I say continually, it doesn't mean that they change every year. I'm saying that they change every so often, and so it there's a long history in people's minds of independence or being a part of another nation, right? Do you understand that? Think of the Middle East. There's a long history in people's minds of when this nation invaded this section of our territory.
Gaza Strip.
Yes. Yes.
That's, I mean, the Palestine, and then the Israelis. I mean, it's crazy. There's actually some pretty good documentaries about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, under separate territories, Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia were created. Okay? Palestine went to Britain. And the colonized people in Asia, Africa, and Vietnam were ignored in the treaty. And this is key. Why? What happens in World War II and afterwards? Okay, some were taken over by Japan, or they were, invaded by Japan. But then, okay, think of Vietnam. Where are we involved later on in this century, in the 19th or 20th century? Vietnam, right.
In Korea, and then Korea.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so, they were under different leaderships, and Chiang Kai-shek had been involved, and he wanted, he was fighting for independence at that time, right? And so then you get to the Vietnam War, and so you're still fighting. So there's a long history, right? And so the Versailles Treaty, as your book says, reflected this hostility between some of the nations, okay? And there were provisions in the Eastern European nations and information that was designed to weaken communist Russia. Does that make sense? Okay, and here's the primary document of the 14 points. All right. So the bitter fight of the League of Nations. This is what came from the 14 points. It's the League of Nations. Okay?
I can't see your PowerPoint.
You can't. All right.
Well, that's like a little bit earlier, but that's it.
Let me get it to you again.
Thank you.
Oh, good. Got it. Okay. So, this covenant created the League of Nations. Senators in the United States were arguing over it. Some said no in its present form. Some said with changes. Some said as is. Okay? Who won? No one?
No, they didn't sign it.
They didn't sign it. They didn't sign it. So they didn't sign the, they didn't sign it. So Wilson, who had collapsed on October 2nd of 1919, he had gone out and tried to drum up public opinion and public support for this. Didn't work. Okay, he collapsed. He was an invalid, and he really probably should have turned it over to the vice president at this time, because he was not able to work with Congress at all, or his cabinet, and his wife was very protective of him, which, that understandable. But as an effective leader, he said, "Don't sign it. Don't sign it at all unless it's exact." Okay, so his party followed his leadership, and nobody signed it. So it was dead. Okay? And then racism in the Red Scare. This is where you see a lot of anti-racial hysteria and lynching, and Chicago race riots, fear about the communist takeovers, and this duplicate anarchy of Russia. You have people who are who your book describes as paranoid now, okay? And it carried through the politics. It carried through in the public until about 1920, okay? It was like pretty much a reaction to what had been going on in the world, and just this general angst and fear of something like this happening again. All right, in the election of 1920, Wilson wanted to run again. Democrats did not agree. So you had FDR and James Cox against James Cox and FDR, and Harding and Calvin Coolidge, who was a Massachusetts governor, running. Harding won in a landslide because he promised to return to normalcy. Okay? The quote of the day. Normalcy. Let's get back to business as usual. Okay? But it was not, it pretty much killed the idea that we would join the League of Nations. Questions? Comments?
No.
Okay. So coping with change, 1919 to 1929. Kind of a fun time. What's one of the eras that we go through? Jazz, yes. Jazz. What else do you see during this time? The Great Gatsby. Flappers, yes. Okay. Different music, different people letting loose, right? A change, again, another change in the culture. And is culture ever static? No. Because every chapter, if you notice, every chapter, it will cover a change in the culture. or the culture is people are coming up against the Victorian mores, right? Or up against immorality, or up against anything, right? And so it was a celebrity-obsessed decade, and it actually marks the dawn of the current and the modern era, okay, where many features of contemporary American life can be traced back to the 1920s. All right, booming business, ailing agriculture. We're not selling abroad anymore. What happens to agriculture? Prices. Yes, they crash. Business. Is it still increasing? We're supplying Europe now, aren't we? We're still supplying Europe, right? Because they were obliterated. Certain parts of Europe were obliterated in the war. You're going to see it again. But really a time of ramping up the industry. So the economy was surging. There were new products. There was new production. There was new selling. There was a recession in 1920. Well, wait a minute. How can an economy be good but a recession in 1920? It's because that's when the war contracts were canceled. Okay? So, if you have a factory that's building widgets for the federal government and the federal government cuts that production, then you've got this factory and you have all these people, and what do? New products. Right? Create something new. Create a market. Expand your market. Right? Export. Right, Brian? Exports. Yeah. Okay. So new consumer goods actually feed prosperity at this time. And this isn't unusual in the economy. New products will sometimes do this. So by the mid-1920s, 60% of homes were electrified. Think about that. 60% of homes were electrified. So you could sell toasters, you could sell wash machines, you could sell more lights, Think of all the things you can sell that use electricity. How about a refrigerator or a freezer? Hair dryers. I don't know that they had mobile hair dryers at this time in the 20s.
Oh, were they all those big
Yeah.
Yeah, you sit down and just
Right. Yeah. Where you can't, and honestly, you can't hear a thing. Okay. So, marketing these appliances. The automobile helped. Right? 60% of families by the 1930s owned an automobile, which meant that people were able to get out. They were able to go out into the wilderness. Did this create tension in the wilderness areas? You bet it did. Right? Where do you put all these cars now? Where do you park them? How do you fill them? What do you do? Now you have all these extra people. It's great. All these extra people are wanting to do things in the wilderness, but now your trails become like wide trails, right? Or somebody builds a road.
You have to make roads.
Exactly. So, is that all bad? Not necessarily. But it was a huge change in a very small amount of time. So the Fordney-McCumber tariff and the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which you look at these names and it's really hard sometimes, but they were pushing U.S. tariffs to all-time highs, okay? So it helped the domestic manufacturers, but it stifled foreign trade. So you had overall wages increasing, benefits were unequal between North and South, between whites and blacks, between women and men. Mexican Americans, immigrants were generally still at the bottom of the pay scale. All right? So the farmers, of course, hard times. You had productivity that was increasing. New assembly lines. Fordism. Right? Remember Fordism? Yeah, okay. Mass production methods. They had global impacts. They were building factories overseas.
Did they use that mass production? How long had mass production been exactly? Like factories pump out products?
It started pretty much with Ford with the automobile. This is when it actually goes into, during the war, of course, is when they really start making it efficient in creating that. But Ford was the leader. There were others who were before him, but he was the leader because it was so big. Yeah. By 1930, 100 corporations controlled half the nation's business. New modes of producing, again, productivity and the new assembly lines. Right? This is when they really start going. The workers' per capita output was up 40%. And, the assembly lines were basically called Fordism here and abroad. What's that?
Oh.
No time, boys, after class. Okay? So we're shifting to a consumer economy. What's a consumer economy?
People buy.
And what's that do to the economy? Brianna, you took government econ. You did it? Not yet. Okay. It grows the economy. Okay? It moves more money?
You get more money from the
consumer to the company and then company back to the consumer.
Right. And Ford paid more for his employees. His theory was that if you paid your employees better, they had more money to spend. And if they had more money to spend, they were going to buy more. Okay? Consumer economy. Consumer-driven economy. All right? We have for a long time been a consumer-driven economy. The more we buy, the more that's produced. Right? All right, so advertising, credit sales. Credit sales. I have a lot to say about credit sales. Not all of it's good. But you'll hear it, don't worry. So, there were, of course, critics to both Uncle Tom's Cabin of the Consumer Movement, the Consumer Research Bulletin, testing products. Because again, some of the products that were supposed to do X, Y, or Z did Q. Right? They didn't always work the way they were supposed to. But, of course, in today's society, you get the same thing. Not as badly as in the 1920s. But business saturated the 1920s culture. All right? Remember that. Business saturated the 1920s and the culture. All right? So, as you have a quote, Calvin Coolidge was, business is America's, I'm going to misquote it. Basically, America stands for business. That's it. So, progressivism and business, are they both, can they work together? Sometimes. Sometimes. Not as much as we've seen in the previous chapter. Right? All right. So, Harding and Coolidge praised corporate America. They hobnobbed with business leaders. They were all about business. Women in the new economic era, labor unions, welfare capitalism. Okay, so more women worked outside the home in the 20s. The proportion, though, stayed about 24%. So there were more women, but overall it was about the same percentage. And again, wage discrimination, the weakening of the labor or the union movement hit women workers pretty hard. And so by 1929, about 3% of women were in unions. Now, if you have a better economy, are unions as, are are people as willing to join unions?
No.
No, because they're doing okay. Unions were at this time working to better your wages. They were working to better your working conditions. They were working to better, maybe benefits. And I use that term loosely because it's nothing like it is today, right? Benefits. But if you're making more money without a union, are you going to pay the union dues? Right. Not really at this time. So women were courted as the consumers, and you had women who were in this new economic era who were gaining college degrees, okay, triple the number of degrees between 1920 and 1930. So a lot more women. Were they able to go into, they went into traditional women's professions like nursing, teaching, libraries. The number of women physicians, because medical schools had only a finite number of women who could be applicants, that number actually dropped. The physician drops. Okay? And so, as the economy goes up, union membership goes down. All right? From 5 million to 3.4 million at this time. And welfare capitalism, companies sold company stock at reduced rates. They provided recreational facilities. They provided cafeterias. So they were using their corporations to provide benefits. Like welfare, not like you know it today in today's definition of welfare, but it's for your welfare, right? To have recreational areas. Okay? It was also an anti-union strategy. Politics in a decade of change. So, stability, traditional values, rapid social change. Okay, conservative candidates came from that rapid social change. All right. Let's see, what else can I tell you? Teapot Dome. Anybody know what that means? Nicholas, are you there yet? No. Okay. All right. So Coolidge raised the ethical tone as Harding is out. Okay? But you have some scandals, and you keep having scandals, don't you? You have presidents who are choosing unwisely. You have scandals in how many different presidencies now? A lot, yes. Okay? Right. Think the Gilded Age, think Harding. Coolidge was seen as a little bit more ethical. He raised the ethical tone. But you had Teapot Dome, which was really a shorthand label for a tangle of scandals that was going on. You've got some good cabinet choices. You've got leased oil reserves, government oil reserves in New Mexico called Teapot Dome. But it was like a catch-all phrase. Okay? And then policy making in a business era, the high tariffs, they continued. Income taxes on the wealthy, they were lowered. Right? And then you have Chief Justice William Howard Taft. Who was he? Who was he before as Chief Justice? He was a presidente. Oui. Very good. So in 1921, he was, he was in during this time. So he overturned a federal ban on child labor that had been passed in 1919. Okay, so pro-business. Pro-business. And people needed their children's wages. Remember the immigrants. Many of the immigrants thought that they couldn't survive without the child's wages. All right? So, Coolidge opposed government assistance for other Americans, like the Mississippi River flood that went from Cairo, Illinois to the Gulf of Mexico, 27,000 square miles. There was no government assistance at this time. Coolidge didn't believe that the government had any responsibility for that. He did strengthen the levees, but for the people who were homeless or had lost their jobs because of it, that was just the way it was, right? Today, they've changed some policies, but it's still, at this time, pro-business. Okay. Let's see. Foreign policy during this time served America's economic interests, which meant independent internationalism. That makes sense. Kind of. The foreign policy was serving America's economic interests. It was driving, the economic interests of America was driving the foreign policy. It was called independent internationalism. Again, business. Business. We're back to business. Remember the business era of Carnegie and them? McKinley? Remember? We're back to business. Harding Coolidge. Okay? So, D.C. was demanding repayment of the $22 billion in Allied war debts and demanding the German reparation payments. Okay? They reduced it in 1924, but they were still requiring it. Right? So, there was, of course, at this time, Germany's economy couldn't support that. They couldn't support all of the reparation payments that they had. All right? In no way were they going to be able to do that. And so there were also there were high tariffs in the United States. What did that mean for a country like Germany? Exactly. So they couldn't sell. So if you can't sell, if you can get it produced, but you still can't even sell it, then what? It's not helpful, right? It's not going to grow your economy. So the European economy, was it good or bad after the war? Yeah, it wasn't very good. It wasn't very good. I mean, of course it's gonna climb, but if you're in the tank, it's gonna take a while. Okay? So Germany had runaway inflation, outstanding amounts of inflation. Okay? Hitler, when he comes in and when he starts gaining power, what's he do about the reparation payments? What's he say to the German people? We aren't going to pay him. Why was that popular?
Because inflation it's almost non-existent.
Right, because inflation was high. You couldn't buy anything, right? So you had gone through the war. War is hard and supplies and food is scarce. And then after the war, supplies and food is still scarce. And then even if you make any money, it takes twice as much or more to buy anything. So if somebody is saying, guess what? We're not going to pay those debts off. You're going to do better. Are you going to like them? You bet. You bet, especially if you're a peasant who comes from very little, right? So the U.S., of course, was also trying to protect corporate interests worldwide, especially in Latin America. And you had naval arms race. You had progressive stirrings again, and Democratic Party division. So the reform spirit was surviving Congress. You've got the Shepard-Towner Act, where there were some baby care centers, the Federal Radio Commission. In 1922, a midterm election, there were some conservatives that were defeated. You had 1924 Democrats that were split between urban and rural. Is this common? At this time, it was not as prevalent as it is today. But yes, there were divisions. There have been divisions since the beginning of the revolution, right? Between urban and rural. We are now, when do we become an urban nation? No. No. Oh, you guys.
You said it.
I did say it.
The 20s.
20s? Which part of the 20s?
First part.
Oh, it's 1920. 1920, we become an urban nation.
So I was right.
Ugh. Talk to the hand.
I said the 20s.
Yeah. Okay, so the Democratic Party divisions. When you divide a party, what happens? It loses momentum and a lot of time elections. However, by one vote, they defeated the Ku Klux Klan condemnation in the Democratic Party. Right? So they couldn't agree. Coolidge won the GOP nomination because he was praising a high tariff, right? Well, that's not the only reason, but urged tax cuts and reducing government spending. And he is a Republican. Are Republicans today seen as that? Okay, so Amber asked a great question. When do these things start shifting? Right? You see here and there these different shifts, okay? Women in politics. Several measures were proposed by the League of Women Voters, and they lobbied for child labor laws, protection of women workers. You had the party that was trying to guarantee women's rights. Your book talks about retreating feminist activism, okay? And the Supreme Court, of course, struck it down, the child labor laws, right? Or protections. So, cities, cars, and consumer goods. Again, we keep going into consumer goods. African Americans migrated to the cities. Women and appliances. You have women targeted for purchases. Soaring energy consumption. I wonder why. Because of appliances, exactly. Okay? So, the number one social impact during this time was what? Nope. Y'all like to drive them. Vehicles. Yes. Automobile. Okay? Because it changed how you shopped. It changed where you went. Changed how you got there, of course. Right? It changed the environment. It threatened the environment in some ways. Okay? Mass production. You have the drudgery of working in a factory. Okay? And I've been to factories. I've toured different factories. And you do sit there for 8 or 12 hours, and like the Kellogg's factory, there was one person who was simply putting boxes together. That was it. That was their job for 8 hours a day.
My uncle, or my family business down in California, they made water pumps. And so I went and worked for them for a couple months. I would sit in a chair and I would open the door to this little thing and then wait for the ball to come out, take the ball out, and then close it back up and just sit there all day, 8 hours a day.
Yeah. It changed the way people thought about work. Celebrities, Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Jack Dempsey, people that you still kind of hear about today even. Okay? It helped force a national culture. You have the Jazz Age and the Flappers. Okay? Jazz, of course, is still controversial. Flappers are really controversial. Right? You have alienated writers who were talking and writing about alienation and cultural turbulence and striving for an American authentic national culture. Not uncommon. Here's F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, architects and painters, modern America. You have skylines, New York City skylines, 50-plus stories. Okay? Go to New York. Did you go to the Empire State Building? Yes. Very cool, isn't it? Yeah, it's impressive. The Harlem Renaissance. Really important social upheaval. Okay? Energize the African American culture. Okay? It was once an elite white suburb. It is no longer an elite white suburb. Harlem. It's a fascinating place to go through. Been there. But it resonated internationally. There were jazz fans all over the world. Louis Armstrong, one of the kings of jazz. Immigration, backlash on social change, revived National Origins Act, only certain people could come, needed workers, so didn't want people, but you still had to use them to work. Nativism, Sacco Vanzetti, okay, it was a huge case, a murder case that began in 1920 about a paymaster that got shot and killed, and a paymaster. And it exposed deep fault lines in the society. Scopes trial. The Scopes trial, it was evolution and targeting evolution and the teaching of evolution. Do you teach it? Ku Klux Klan. You know, what can you say about the Ku Klux Klan? Ku Klux Klan. You get on their website and look at the Ku Klux Klan. It's very benign. It's really a fascinating website to read. Did some research on it. The original Klan faded. The Birth of a Nation, the movie Birth of a Nation, helped revive it in 15. Okay, Prohibition, bitter controversy. All right, with alcohol and morals. 1928. You had Hoover and Smith. Smith was a Democrat and a Catholic from New York. Who won? Hoover. And here's the election. Hoover, it was 58%, but the electoral vote was 444 to 87. Okay? Conservative, and the end of progressivism. Okay. Any questions?
Why does it get you out right at that time?
Because it has to give time